Hey, everybody. Matt Lewis here. I'm here with Mike Pesca of The Gist. How you doing, man?
Well, I should plug the gist with these are our symbols, these are the lobsters. And if you are a lobster, you get a little gist branded hooded sweatshirt. Fun fact, they originally just sent us the regular non-hooded sweatshirt. And so we said, we paid for hooded. And so so we have now 100 unused, unhooded sweatshirts that if you become a subscriber to the Gist or to Pesca Plus, we say, we give you a free sweatshirt. It's in the smallest imaginable size, which is lobster size.
I love it. Now, Jonah Goldberg has said before, he had a book, very underrated book, really good book years ago called The Tyranny of Cliches.
Mhm.
And I've heard him say that oftentimes he would be about to go on a talk radio show and people would say clicks. They didn't know how they didn't know how to pronounce the word cliche. I think that's what it was. It was something that was fairly common, but it was often mispronounced. Do people know what gist is or how to pronounce gist?
So the thing is, I host a show called The Gist, and people use the gist. And the country of Nigeria loves the word the gist, which I found out one day. 1,000 podcasts started to populate my feed, also called The Gist. And it was because there was like a podcast company in Nigeria saying, start your own podcast and gist, which is a phrase in Nigeria that means like spill the tea or gossip. Anyway, so everyone knows the word The Gist. There is a certain percentage of people, which is actually helpful to me, who thinks it might be spelled J-I-S-T. And so when I say, oh, you might like my show, it's called The Gist. And if they're like, oh, looking for it, I can't find the J-I-S-T, I helpfully tell them it's G-I-S-T, but then I say to myself, you're not the ideal listener. Gist, if you think it's spelled with a J.
Well, it is a great name because it sums up, let's get to the bottom line. What's the gist of it all? And so
Let's do it. Yeah.
Let's do it. What's the gist, Mike Pesca?
I've been thinking about a lot of things, and I'd like to at this point also. Oh, look, Greg, is it Juice? Guice? That's interesting. Not reading that right. He joined. I wanted to ask you a couple questions.
Yeah, man.
I wanted to, because I know my audience is watching this and your audience is watching this. So you're an interesting guy. Before we even started, we talked about when you were big you were a campaign operative. Operative, is that insulting? Can we call that?
I think it's the nicest word for what I did.
Yeah. You were a campaign, you were a dirty trickster, you were a rat fucker.
There you go.
We actually were campaigns, and then you became a conservative blogger. And there was a time when people, including actual conservatives, were actually running for office. That was a very big deal, and you benefited from that time. And you were being a little self-deprecating because I think it was a big deal, right? It was a big deal before Substack, before conservative voices had maybe an easy way to penetrate the mainstream media. So it kind of was a big deal, wasn't it?
It was amazing. Well, I can just tell you, it was an amazing, fun, heady time. So first of all, the blogosphere, as you probably recall, I don't want to say it was more like intellectual or anything like that, but there were real discussions that went on. And what would happen is, Hugh Hewitt would write something on his blog that would be controversial, and Matthew Iglesias would respond, and then Patrick Ruffini on the right would respond. And actually, for a while, I wrote the way I started as a blogger was at Human Events Online, believe it or not. I wrote something called The Rightometer, where I went through the conservative blogosphere each day and just gave the gist of what's being said. Hugh Hewitt says this, Patrick Ruffini says that. It was a take on National Journal had something called the Blogometer that did the same thing. And then for years, Bill Scher and I were at this thing called Blogging Heads TV, and we used to do a show called The Weekend Blog, where we would talk about what did Michelle Malkin say on her blog this week? What did Ezra Klein and so it was a big deal back then. And in 2008, there was if you were running for president, and we're thinking like Mitt Romney, John McCain, Mike Huckabee, there was a sense that there was like a conservative blogger primary. And I got so lucky because I was working at townhall.com, and everyone else at Town Hall was basically in the tank for Mitt Romney, including like Hugh Hewitt. And at National Review, they all really loved Mitt Romney. So John McCain was very desperate to have a conservative blogger, or he would have, and he would have these weekly, conference calls, and it would be like they would take my call before Nora O'Donnell or Jake Tapper. You know what I mean? And I'm sure it really pissed them off. But long story short, it was an amazing experience for being at that point kind of a young up and coming guy who was wet behind the ears to like get to like ride on the Straight Talk Express and hang out with John McCain.
Right. And I think maybe back then, it's probably earlier. Yeah, it was earlier. Salon was where Tapper was writing. All of these people, like you say, Ezra Klein, he was a very good blogger, but it wasn't clear he was going to become the most important left-leaning columnist like Johnny Apple, one of these guys, W. Apple, one of these guys who really affect lives every day. Back then, when you were doing it and you were a McCain guy, I'm sure, because for the reasons that you can articulate, do you think the rest of the conservative blogosphere was identifying Romney as more conservative? And I'm sure you all had different ideas, and Michelle Malkin thinks very differently than Jonah Goldberg. So was it that this guy embodies conservatism, or this guy could win? And where did you zig? On which of those 2 points did you zig when everyone else was zagging?
Back then, it was incredibly ideological. It wasn't pragmatic primarily. I mean, you know, you could use pragmatism as an excuse, right? So you could say like,
still to this day, right?
Well, yeah,
but
back then
like, this is a bad
especially.
policy, and of course, no one else will like it. Yeah.
But so, for example, like I would say, Rudy Giuliani can't win the nomination because he's not pro-life and he dresses in drag with Donald Trump. But like, really, the reason I was against Giuliani is he was too liberal for me. You know what I mean? But I would use but not just that, he can't win a Republican primary, which turned out to actually be true. So for me, it was very ideological. It was very ideas driven. And my argument was that Mitt Romney's a phony. Now, look, I feel bad now because Mitt Romney, it turns out, is quite heroic and a super nice guy. But at the time, I'm like, he did Romney Care in Massachusetts. He's obviously a phony. I don't like the fact that he's tall and good looking. I didn't say that, but you know, he's like this perfect Mormon dude. And I'm like, look, I think you can make the argument that John McCain actually on the merits is more conservative, certainly more pro-life. And the other thing too is I've always, and this is probably what kept me from becoming a Trumper, I've always kind of admired the part of journalism where you're somewhat cynical and McCain had that. You know what I mean? Like McCain had that.
Yeah.
Like he appealed to like the cynical journalist side as opposed to someone like Romney who was like talking about being severely conservative, you know?
Yeah. He would look through things and like then maybe look to you, and you both shared a moment where you're both thinking, this is not quite on the up and up.
Yeah.
So do you think back then you probably didn't know you were doing it? In fact, you thought you were kind of breaking free of the normal shackles of we did journalism and how we did opinion journalism. But it seems to me that you were enforcing the norms of conservatism and keeping the party conservative. And it was a feedback loop that the candidates were looking at this new form of media. The people in the new form of media were selecting for their number one concern was, you know, conservatism. We could define it differently, but this ideology of conservatism. I'm just kind of hatching this theory as we talk, that is one of the reasons why populism was kept at, because the big voices in new media were mainly ideological and mainly selecting for that ideology when it came to their candidate.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that what happened is obviously there was a technological shift where it went from being like the mainstream media having all the power to this thing called the new media. But back then, at this point, the new media were people, it was like me, Eric Erickson from Red State. Like Red State was big at that point. The National Review Online was very big and important at that point. You know, the Jonah Goldbergs, those folks.
Corner, right? That was their thing, the Corner.
The Corner, which was a fabulous kind of group blog. I was at Town Hall. We had a group blog too. It was like me, Mary Catherine Ham, Hugh Hewitt, Amanda Carpenter, just to name a few. But we were all mainstream conservatives. And, you know, I think someone like Michelle Malkin was certainly in the coalition at the time. Everyone liked her. Everyone kind of got along, even though it was like, oh, she's a little bit extreme on this. She's a little more populist than what's the deal with this Dubai ports deal? Like, why is it why are we spending so much time talking about the Dubai ports deal?
Right,
Um,
right.
but we all tried to get along, and there was a sense of kind of like Frank Meyer in the old days with the three-legged stool of conservatism and fusionism. We tried to stay together, but generally we were kind of mainstream Reagan conservatives. And even though we were new media, and I think that what happened is, that meant that really we were not serving this unserved portion of the population out there, right? So the technology had evolved where increasingly anyone could have a voice. And yet still, by and large, the prominent top tier conservative bloggers were National Review types, which no offense, like I'm down with that, but it obviously missed what was about to happen with Trump.
I think it's all just the media changed, and at that time, it was still gate kept.
Yeah.
The gates were opened a little bit, but all of you guys and women had credentials. You all could write. You all could write at length and hold an audience, but the audience had to know where to go to get you. Whereas then it changed and it becomes phones in our pockets and social media. So this was pre-social media exploding. And once social media explodes, the skills that it takes to get attention are not that Matt Lewis knows some things and can argue a point better than Jonah Goldberg or Michelle Malkin, right? The things that take to get attention is that your name is Cat Turd, and that you
Yes.
have that you could reselect a meme, and there are no standards of truth. There is really no gatekeepers. So did we become populist because we were always populist and Trump tapped into something? Sure, but I think every society would be populist if they didn't have, certain other restrictions and norms. Yeah, I mean, look, we've just been talking for 12 minutes, but I think I now have a clearer sense of exactly what happened and why. And this is my theory. Like, everything is overdetermined, and I don't want to give too much credit for the media controls or influences all of our opinions. That's usually a trap. I mean, the media usually follows opinion. But man, I think the technology is the most determinant thing of our
I do
life in
too.
the last
I do
20
too.
years and just the world over. Yeah. You're
I
telling me
totally do
that.
too, and not just social media. Although that is the big, iPhones and social media dramatically change politics in America, and I think for the worse. But this is something Jonah Goldberg. Not to keep name dropping him. Believe me, I'm not obsessed with him, but for whatever reason, and I know I've heard you on his show before. He's
Yeah,
coming
he's
up a
great.
lot. He's coming up a lot today. But it's a point he's made that technology is actually just dramatically underrated in terms of shifting politics. And it's not that there's these great philosophers who come up with ideas. It's really technologically driven. Like the automobile changed our mores. The automobile and the birth control pill changed our mores about sex and the culture way more than like Phyllis Schlafly or Betty Friedan ever did. Right? I mean, it's technology, and I would argue that the ultrasound probably made us more pro-life than anything any pro-life activist ever did. Like if you can see an ultrasound picture of your baby, you don't call it a fetus, you call it a baby, you put it up on your refrigerator. That alone changed minds way more than any prove me wrong, like conservative activist or preacher. And so, yeah, it dramatically changed. I will say it really hurt my career, Mike, because this moment in time we're talking about, right? So from like '05 to 2015, or I had like a decade where I was really in this sweet spot where like I had these conservative credentials. I was writing at places like Human Events, townhall.com, The Daily Caller, where I worked for Tucker Carlson for 6 years. That gave me sort of the credentials. I had the platform, but I also had the capacity or the ability to go on Fox and Friends, Morning Joe, CNN, and not seem crazy. You know what I mean? I could talk their talk too. And so it made me kind of a hot commodity, which obviously I am no longer. You and I are now doing a live stream. So no, I'm just kidding. But you get my point. Like anyone in the world nowadays can do a Substack live, but it used to be like if you could get on cable news or if you were at Slate or Salon or the Daily Beast, like then you kind of had made it. Those a lot of those outlets are now even just shells of what they
Yes.
used to be.
I would also add to it that it is true that if you're of that world and then you there are plenty of people who then pivoted and had huge followings, but what they had to do in some cases was abandon their principles.
Yes.
So maybe if
Yep.
you're lucky enough, I don't know about Michelle Malkin. It seems like she benefited from new social media. Maybe she didn't abandon her principles since she was always like I would say very anti-immigration, let's just say.
Yeah.
But a lot of other people did. And if you abandon your principles on the conservative side into if Trump says it's good, or, yeah, I know I've always been pro-life, but Trump's not that pro-life, so I'm going to de-emphasize that. If you correctly abandon your principles, if asked to, into what's now popular, I think you had a good shot continuing on
Yeah.
trajectory in social media. For people on the left, if the principles to be abandoned were things like, oh, now let's be not responsible with the economy, but, something like democratic socialists, let's now, endorse modern monetary theory or the ideas behind that. Let's take reparations or defund the police as good ideas. If you were able to do that, maybe you had a shot at becoming something in the new world of social media. But if you're just you thought of principles as principles and not malleable
Yeah.
selling points, it became harder. And I think maybe you and me are in that bucket.
Yeah. And the thing is, I can't even pat myself on the back because like I couldn't do it. Like
No, it wasn't an
I
issue.
literally
Yeah.
I couldn't pull it off. Like
Yeah.
even if I talked myself into it, like, okay, today is the day I'm gonna do a heel turn and I'm gonna go Trump. I literally couldn't pull it off. I couldn't do it. I would like viscerally couldn't bring myself to do it and it wouldn't work.
Yeah, and I also, because I'm kind of stubborn, would tell myself, well, of course, the audience doesn't want that, but, maybe the potential audience will never get to see me if I'm not saying maybe now is a time to defund the police. Anyway, do you think Tucker Carlson abandoned his principles? You know him pretty well.
Yeah, no, I worked. So first of all, I worked with Tucker for 6 years, and he was a great boss. To be honest with you, he was awesome. For those 6 years,
Yeah.
he was
People love him,
so
like former
yeah.
conservatives who break with him now, Jonathan Jonah. Jonah will tell you that interpersonally, they never had a problem with Tucker. In fact, they very much liked him. He was an affable guy.
So I've been, as you can imagine, I've given a great deal of thought to this, and I just read Jason Zingerle is a new book coming out, I think in January, about Tucker, and it's called it's something like "Hated by All the Right People," which is in line that Tucker said that of the Hungarian president Viktor Orban, that he's hated. So that's where the line comes from. That's what he told Orban, that you're hated by all the right people. And so not only did I have those 6 years and then the intervening like 7 or 8 years since then to try to think of what happened to Tucker, now I've just read this book. And so I still don't have, I haven't come to terms with it completely, but here's what I did learn from the book, which it's like I'm reading the book and like it's comporting with my lived experience. And I'm like, oh, I remember that, but I didn't put that together then. Or it's sort of like a Rashomon effect. If you've ever like seen multiple takes of a movie from a different person's perspective, that's what this book helped me do. So look, when I met Tucker I met him years before, but when I went to work for Tucker in 2011, he at that point was already kind of populist. He was no longer the libertarian, even though I think he was still affiliated with like Cato. He was no longer libertarian. So he was populist. So in that regard, he hasn't changed since 2011. But what became clear to me reading the book is that the reason Tucker Carlson, think about Fox News. Tucker around 2011, 2012 goes to Fox News and he becomes he's like the low man on the totem pole. He's like doing Fox and Friends weekend mornings, like 6 a.m. weekends. It's not a great gig. And how is it that Tucker, of all the people, he even like he leaped over like Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly and became the number one guy at Fox? How did he do that? And the reason is that Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity did not have a website. Tucker had the Daily Caller. And the reason that benefited him was that meant Tucker was looking at data analytics that no one else was looking. And the Daily Caller invested in, I think it's called Chartbeat, which at the time was more sophisticated than most of the data most websites were receiving. So Tucker could see, oh, when Matt Lewis writes a piece defending Marco Rubio, it doesn't perform. When Matt Boyle writes a piece accusing Senator Menendez of visiting prostitutes, it goes through the roof.
When in fact, it should have been taking gold bars from Egyptians. He got that one wrong. Yeah.
I mean, he's guilty of something, but just probably not the thing not the thing we accused him of. But look, I mean, the examples I just gave you, you don't have to be a genius to know that the Matt Lewis piece defending Marco Rubio will not perform as well as the Matt Boyle piece accusing someone. But I'm using those as extreme examples. Tucker had much more information at his disposal to craft his image at Fox. So I think that was his secret weapon that allowed him to catapult over other people who were there first, and just as easily could have been the populist, star at Fox.
Yeah. So first of all, I would assume the stories always told about Roger Ailes is that without Chartbeat, he had that instinct in general, but you're saying it was too in general. He's a creature of the Nixon era, and Tucker had it much more fine bore.
And more, not only more than Roger Ailes, but more than Sean Hannity, more than Laura Ingraham. I mean, they're all smart people who I think care deeply about ratings and fan service. But I think Tucker, because he had the Daily Caller, he could even test things out, right? He could have Neil Monroe write a piece about immigration, and then he could do A/B testing even to see what performed better. He was looking at this not only every day, but probably every hour. He just had better data than anybody else that was competing with him. Now, I can tell you personally, Mike, because deep down, I posture, I don't know what the word is, but I see myself as an artist. I know that's totally pretentious, and I know I'm not, but that's how I view it. So I actually avoid this data because I don't want it to influence me. I see it as perverse and in a way, it would I might as well sell insurance if I'm gonna, you know what I mean? If I'm gonna be telling people what they want to hear, I might as well just actually make real money. But obviously, that's not the smart move.
If you're doing some sort of arbitrage, it should be with the Thai bot or whatever orange juice futures, not your actual opinions. But I get it. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, very successful broadcasters, asterisks for all of them in my book for the kind of people or ideology or ideas they have. But they would probably say, I'm successful. I go with my gut. And Tucker was essentially saying, oh, yeah, I'm going with the audience's gut. And guess what? He got a bigger audience from that. My question is, did you ever suspect there was no limiting factor in how far he would take that? So just a couple of things. Lately, we've seen more than the dalliance with neo-Nazis, the support of the total embrace of Nick Fuentes. That's one. And the second thing is I was scratched by demons and there are demons living in the bottom of the sea. So those are two things where sure it's populist and sure it gets views. And if you had told me a totally amoral actor who had some communication ability and already a built-in audience and insight into what the audience wanted would be able to say that, I'd say, of course, his name is Alex Jones. But I guess that's my question. Did you get inklings that Tucker was essentially willing to become Alex Jones with a bow tie if the audience and data demanded it?
No. And in fact, Tucker had done quite the opposite. He used to debate and mock conspiracy theorists and weirdos and crazy people and 9/11 truthers and people like that. And it's funny because he would use the exact same cadence and facial expressions, crinkling the nose, squinting the eyes, and the same sort of high pitch, the laughing, all of that. He would marshal that against weirdos and conspiracy theorists. So no, I didn't see that coming. Now, in our office, it was incredibly irreverent. Like, not only do we have a bar and a kegerator and ping pong tables and all that, people said outrageous things all the time. But in the glory days, before, this is a huge caveat, but before the white nationalists started working there, there were like a lot of very cool, serious, good people there. And I'm thinking of people like Alexis Levinson, who went to BuzzFeed later, Jamie Weinstein, Will Rod, who's now at the Free Beacon, John Ward, who went to HuffPost and Yahoo, Chris Moody, who went to Yahoo. Like, the Daily Caller, it's underrated that it actually identified and provided a platform for like a bunch of young journalists who later went out into the mainstream media. But it was an outrageous, fun place, and crazy
Yeah.
things were said. And Tucker would say outrageous things all the time, but he was a very decent and great boss. And so, to answer your question, no, I would not have expected that.
Right. So I don't know what's in the Zengerly book. And he's a great journalist, by the way. I just did a three-part series about Pablo Torre doing something about Riley Gaines. And as a
Yes.
contrast, I said, if you want to read someone who is writing about this with, I don't want to use sensitivity, it seems too soft a word, with a boldness that takes into account the fact that there are many, many Americans, in fact, the vast majority, who more or less agree with Riley Gaines's main point. Read Zengerly's New York Times Magazine piece on Blair Fleming, who's the trans volleyball player at San Jose State. That's how to do it. That's how to acknowledge that there are people who actually agree with Riley Gaines and then figure out where America goes from there. So anyway, I'm going to compliment Zengerly, but I would also assume that the book gets at this whole transformation shows the power of the personal. And it all stems from, well, Tucker is an interesting personality and he really feels abandoned by his mother. And from what I understand, she like left the family, really abandoned the family to follow, as he tells it, like some, her hippie bliss. And his dad was a very important conservative businessman. But when when Fox, well, it was post Roger Ailes, when Fox jettisoned him, when he was saying, let us adhere to, guys, let us not get into this crazy uh, election denialism. And then when he was essentially booted from Fox for reasons that they were trying to protect themselves, that's when he said, it's game on. I'm going to do whatever I can. There is no limit to my yearning to beat them, to get a bigger audience, to become more powerful, to become more of the kingmaker. And that's what he did. And it was personal at that point.
Yeah, I need to go back and reread that part of the book because I'm not sure that there's the rosebud moment the part where he goes from being like the weekend host at Fox News to being the primetime star. I felt like that was very well explained via the data at the Daily Caller. I don't know if I got a satisfying answer to the transformation from Fox into what he is now. Um, other than just sort of like the obvious point being like what you just said. And I do think, Tucker is someone who, he was basically fired by CNN, fired by MSNBC, and fired by Fox. Where else? Where do you go next?
Right.
And clearly, I think he saw the writing on the wall, like which way the wind was blowing, and look no further than Nick Fuentes or Candace Owens to know what is. Now, it turns out some of that support may be bots, but certainly not all of it.
Yeah. I always thought that the reason that the number, I don't know, 4 cable company, 7 cable company doesn't just pump out pornography. We're always told, oh, advertisers won't like it or the audience will be repulsed. I never thought that was true. I just thought you'd get more eyes on pornography just if pornography were allowed to compete with everyone else. It wouldn't be the most popular, but it would be pretty popular if you're given human nature. It's because of these external restrictions and what society would think of you. But what the internet shows, what social media shows, especially what X, when as it's been X taken over by Musk shows, is that When there are none of those restrictions, the equivalent of political pornography wins. And Tucker understood that and was so desperate to beat Els and to be successful that he's now a purveyor of political pornography. Let me ask you this, Matt. I wanted to ask you this when we started. To define for you, for my audience, who's your favorite current senator and also all time?
Well, man, I don't like politicians. So I don't think I have a current favorite senator. Um, I liked McCain, but probably more for his kind of mavericky 2000 race than his Senate career. But I've been, the biggest mistakes I've ever made as a writer were writing nice things about people. Like, I don't regret the mean things. I regret the nice things. And so, like, I was a big Marco Rubio fan. In fact, if Marco Rubio had become president in 2016, I would have probably been like, I don't want to say Scott Jennings isn't high enough. I don't know what the equivalent would be. Like, I would have been the leading, probably conservative voice in America if Marco Rubio had won the presidency in 2016. So obviously, I am embarrassed by my support of Rubio. Even though I do hold out hope that he can, in some cases, like slow walk some of Trump's stuff. Maybe he's a double agent or something.
And I was sorry to interrupt. I think we see that now, like with the excesses. Like he's the one who pulls the Zelensky negotiation back from the brink. Same thing with Israel. So I'm glad he's he's embodying the role that a few of the generals had in the first administration, as I see it.
I hope. And he's doing a better job of it than they did because I don't think Trump is onto him yet.
Yeah.
But remember, Tucker Carlson kept him reportedly from becoming Veep by telling Trump that the neocons will kill you. They will assassinate you if you make someone like Rubio your running mate. The other one that I liked a lot, and I'm also embarrassed by, is Ben Sass. I was a big Ben Sass fan, and I think he turned out to be kind of a wimp. Who I think he just got hired by AEI, which is, he's back for some more cash, I guess.
Well, his tenure as the president of the University of Florida seemed like it was going well, but then I don't know how much to credit the reporting, but there's some scandal around it.
There was scandal. Yeah. I don't know if it's legit or not, but I felt like he kind of let us down as a senator. So, like, basically, in Almost Famous, when the Rolling Stone reporter says, they're not your friends. Rock stars are not your friends.
Yeah,
that's how I feel about politicians. And in fact, I know there are a lot of obviously, if you want to be a straight reporter and a journalist who kind of breaks news and gets leaks and stuff, you have to have sources. But as an analyst and a commentator, I feel like the more distance I have from politicians, the better I actually am at that part of the job.
So you're not sexting with any third-party candidates, you're saying?
That we can prove.
Wasn't that Philip Seymour Hoffman as Lester Bangs who said that?
Yeah, you got it, nailed it. Yes,
I was talking to someone about how much I was talking to Eli Lake about how much I miss Lester Bangs. Sorry, Philip Seymour Hoffman, but he knew Lester Bangs. That's interesting. I'm going to take a side note here by saying I mentioned this report I did criticizing Pablo Torre a little bit. And, he wrote into me and he said, "Why didn't you ask me for comment?" And a few people in the comments, ironically, said, "Oh, yes, that's poor form from Mike." And my answer is, when I do reporting, here is an unearthed fact, and I'm going to surprise you, or you're going to be confronted with a fact you didn't know about or that someone else knew about, then yes, of course, you get reached out for comment. And when I do it through something other than the gist. But when I do commentary, I don't. And it may seem weaselly, but what you just said, I was talking to another very good reporter, commentator, and he says, then you reach out for comment and they talk you out of what you wanted to say. And sometimes they've done you a favor, and most of the time they've just done themselves a favor. And we're all
Yeah.
human beings, so there is a point to not asking for comment if you
Yeah.
need to say what you have to say and
Well, I
you're
mean,
being fair.
look, right now I'm
And
writing a
then, sorry to interrupt
piece.
here. If I had to articulate it, what you want to
Yeah.
be is the most fair. The question is asking for comment always the most fair to your audience? That's the question.
Like right now I'm writing a piece about Jasmine Crockett running in
Good.
Texas.
Yes.
And, I think it's probably not a great idea if Democrats want to take back the Senate. And Colin Allred kind of got pushed out, and now it's her versus Tallarico. And like everything like, I'm making this argument that like Democrats risk blowing a chance to take back the Senate. All the stars have to align, right? For them to take back the Senate, it has to be a wave election. You probably need Republicans to field a weak candidate, which they are going to do with Paxton.
Yeah.
And then you need Democrats to field a good candidate. And so, like, that's my
Good
take.
candidate for that electorate.
For
is what you
Texas,
mean.
for
Yes,
statewide in Texas, right? And like, that's my argument. Do I need to comment? Like, call up Jasmine Crockett's press person and be like, "Yeah, I'm thinking of writing this piece," but did she really say that about butch body, a bad butch body, or whatever she said about Marjorie Taylor Greene? Like, no, I don't need to ask her that. I saw the video. It's in print. Like,
Right.
I have an argument. I don't need to go verify things that are already on the record to express my opinion as an opinion columnist. But what a waste of time that would be.
Yes. It's a little different, I think, when it's a public figure who you're almost certain is going to give you the no comment. If you're the New York Times, also, it's a different calculation. Like, she might give a comment, and then you always have to do it.
Yeah.
Of all the things the public is not exactly tuned into on the same wavelength as journalists, it's a minor one, but it just came up, so I wanted to talk about it. I have a list of things. By the way, my favorite senator all time, maybe Thaddeus Stevens. Daniel Patrick Moynihan was senator when I was growing up. That guy is the ideal, I think. And I didn't even realize.
But I would argue Moynihan much better intellectual than senator. As a senator, Moynihan was basically a knee-jerk Democrat. Like, he basically voted party line as far as I can remember. But as an intellectual, he would make contrarian, fascinating art. So I agree with that caveat.
Yeah. Well, for where he was and where I was, 9, but casting myself back, I think I supported most of his votes. I am maybe a knee-jerk 1980s liberal. I don't know if that's true. He was probably more in favor of, like restrictions on housing and rent control. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe we could say his ranking is as a force in a Nixon administration. He was great.
Yeah.
As an intellectual, he was better. As a senator, he was third. As a train station, he's like fourth because you can't sit down in the Moynihan station.
They say it's beautiful, though, and much cleaner. I've not been. I used to go to Penn Station all the time.
It is nice. They have nice, expensive restaurants, but there's no place to sit. And like when you're waiting for a train, you might want to sit. So it's like the war on sitting. And
but Mike,
seated.
If you start providing chairs and benches, next thing you know, there's going to be a lot of undesirable sitting.
Yeah.
It's the same reason that parks no longer have trash cans.
Right. Once we have two things. Once you decide not to enforce laws, then you have to take away chairs. I guess the only choice is to take away chairs, right? Not to have someone who says, eat it.
And trash cans.
This is a hypothetical, and it's a version of it's not if you were king. It's this. Stands derangement, stands all the forces we're talking about of populism and social networks and just the derangement that is descended on politics. So maybe this is a way of saying, cast yourself back to 2015 when you were riding high, and maybe it's a version of the Saturday Night Live cast we always like is when we were in high school. But stands derangement, what would the parties stand for today? There are always differences in the parties. There are always cleavages. So it's not exactly ideal Republican Party, because I could articulate my ideal Democratic Party, and it wouldn't be the actual Democratic Party that it wouldn't be the actual stances of the Democrats, I don't think. So, sans derangement, what do you think the differences between the parties would be? What would the Republicans stand for?
But I guess in hindsight, my version of politics, especially today, seems so tepid and boring. I mean, I grew up. One of my first memories is my dad taking me when he voted for Ronald Reagan. So I am very much wedded to that version of the conservative movement and of conservatism. And so it's just almost hackneyed things like a strong national defense. But it includes having, the post World War II world order, like preserving that, which is like no longer the case, right? But then on top of that, I coined this phrase, which other people ended up appropriating, which was modernize, don't moderate. So part of what I was pushing for in 2015, and I was hoping that candidates like Marco Rubio and Nikki Haley might kind of lead the way in this doing this, right? So you're not going to moderate on things, but you're going to do a better job of selling them to a younger, more diverse America. And so um, let's take the pro-life cause as an example. Um, Talking about that in a way, and I think George W. Bush talked about having a culture of life. And to me, a culture of life transcends merely abortion, right? It's how you treat the stranger, the widow, the immigrant. Right now, this is being talked about by a Democrat named James Tallarico, who's running for Senate in Texas, who also went to seminary. It would basically be finding a way to take things that and Jeb Bush talked about this too, right? It's the right to rise, help human flourishing. That would really be my goal, is sort of take Reaganism but with a Spanish accent or something, Marco Rubio being able to and my theory was, and I'm not talking about it that eloquently because I'm so out of practice because we don't talk about this stuff anymore because
Yeah, yeah.
it's so irrelevant. But, you know, my argument in 2015, 2016 was, look, all you Trump supporters, you think it's Flight 93. You're defeatists. You assume that we haven't lost anything. Like, we live in this miracle of Western civilization. We are so blessed. We have so much prosperity. But what we need to do is find a way to sort of translate that into the future and help more people rise, more people flourish. And it sounds so boring and trite, but the Trump model was the opposite. It was like, no, things aren't okay or pretty good. And we don't need to just help more people flourish. We need
Right.
to burn this mother to the ground. And to me, that's like Edmund Burke. I hate to go all Edmund Burke on us here, but Yuval Levin wrote this great book about 10 or 15 years ago, juxtaposing Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine. Levin argues that Edmund Burke is like the first conservative, Paine is the first progressive, and Paine wanted to start the world over again. Just like the French Revolution, let's destroy everything, start at year zero. Burke said, no, we live in this we're blessed. We live in this great civilization. We need to reform things, make things a little better. It sounds so boring. That's why you'll never see a biopic about Edmund Burke. You're going to see a lot of them about
Right,
more interesting, flamboyant, exciting
right.
people. You're not going to see the Burke movie because he just was a boring guy who just wanted to make things better for more people.
Although, this touches on my pitch for the Thomas Paine biopic. Ladies and gentlemen, coming to theaters, The Leafleteer.
But a much more romantic figure who actually ended up being imprisoned during the French Revolution.
Yes,
Ironically.
yeah, true believer. My version, I get that. Understand what you're saying. Like, what you're saying in a way is like there's no reason that Republicans shouldn't have 40% of Latino voters if they just weren't racist, like overtly, unnecessarily racist towards Latinos. They still did better with Latinos, even given that racism. And that, I'm not saying all Republicans are, but the Trumpian brand of it is, and Tucker Carlson certainly seems to be insensitive. My version of Democrats is something like there's going to be a more tough party and a more sensitive party, mommy party, daddy party, and that's good. You need both parents. It's good to have both parents. I understand that Democrats would be the mommy party. They would favor diplomacy more than military intervention, let's say. Probably, just given how things are today, they might overfavor diplomacy. Diplomacy is always good. They might choose not to use military intervention as a bit of a knee jerk compared to where I would be. Like, for me, the strikes on the Fordo facility were wise and well taken. And I think history has proven that right. And I understand if I would be in the minority of Democrats. Another thing for me is that they would take the border seriously. So if you saw this excellent New York Times article this week, which really does point out, here are the tangible mistakes Biden made with the border. They wouldn't have made those mistakes, but they probably would have let, quote, too many immigrants in because they were very sympathetic to immigrants. Mario Cuomo was someone I always admired. He was probably more sympathetic or would have policies to protect people, say, from getting evicted, which contradicts a lot of good economics about what happens with the housing stock if you can't get rid of bad renters. Oh, that's where the Democrats would be in my ideal world, which is very less beholden to the groups, less. They would not be racist, but they wouldn't have articulated campaigns of, quote, anti-racism. The whiff or accusation of racism or insensitivity wouldn't totally pull the plug on any sort of productive debate. So both parties have definitely moved to extremes. And I think all the political science data shows that. Yeah.
And, back when Mike Huckabee was semi-sane, he used to have a line. He said, I'm a Republican, but I'm not mad about it.
Yeah.
And so I do think a lot of this...
Mike Huckabee had a lot of good lines that don't, I think, actually match Mike Huckabee's governance.
No, they don't. But but the line itself not only is a smart or funny quip, but it has a point. And, I was telling Charlie Sykes yesterday, we do a weekly live, Substack live, that I adhere to the Patrick Swayze doctrine of Roadhouse when he says, if someone comes in here and starts trouble, we'll show them to the door and we'll be nice. And if they won't walk, we'll walk them and we'll be nice. And, you can be nice. You can enforce your laws and your rules and keep the bar from descending into, degenerates and whatever. You can impose order and rules and also be nice until, as Patrick Swayze says, we'll be nice until it's time to not be nice. But mostly you can be nice. And that's I call it the Patrick Swayze doctrine. We can need a better name, maybe.
I'm working on a piece for Substack where I posit that in our politics and our society and our technology, these days, we are always going to reach for the chainsaw and never the scalpel. So if you look at DOGE, if you look at immigration, if you look at Gaza policy, there are legitimate debates to be had. And I think Donald Trump is very good at identifying the mood of the public, and then he institutes a quote unquote correction. And of course, it always goes too far. Of course, it's always to maximize the PR version of it, right? So Kristi Noem posing in athleisure in front of prisoners in Seacott prison, or his DEI correctives, which I do think need to be done, is, sweeping the chainsaw, just sweeping out any semblance of, a civil rights lawyer within all the federal agencies. But I think that's not just Trump. I think that's our age. And I also think that there aren't too many successes of the scalpel that we could point to. The thing about the chainsaw is it does get more attention. The possible flaws in my argument are scalpel things actually work. They just don't get the attention. We have to highlight the ways where good precision corrections have worked and had a good impact. I'm sure there's some. I don't know what they are. I think they're less in government, more in private industry. But what do you think? Are we in an age where the chainsaw will always beat the scalpel? Does the excesses of DOGE or the Trump administration show that that is not the way forward?
Well, and it's interesting you use the chainsaw because, Elon Musk literally came out on stage at CPAC with a
Yeah.
chainsaw. So, I mean, it's an apt metaphor. Yeah, look, I think we're certainly in an age of the chainsaw, but and I don't want I don't want people to think that I'm being too wonky, but to go back and put on my conservative hat, and especially Edmund Burke, like if it's about conserving the good things of Western civilization, conserving the founding fathers' vision, then you don't use a chainsaw. You do use a scalpel, right? And um, I think part of the essence of conservatism is a humbleness, that epistemological modesty, that we don't know everything. Well, it goes to that story about Chesterton's fence. If you find a fence in the woods by itself, the progressive says there's no reason for it. Let's knock it down. The conservative says, well, wait a second. Let's find out why it's here before maybe it's good, maybe it's not. But let's find out why was it here, and is it still needed? That's the scalpel. That's a conservative instinct, is to let's not go too crazy. Let's be careful. Let's be cautious. That's another word for conservative, is cautious and prudent. And obviously that element of conservatism is no longer part of Trump, because Trump is a radical. And so the Democrats, by design, aren't even supposed to be cautious. The Democrats, the progressives, are supposed to be the chainsaw party, actually. Republicans are supposed to be, no, slow it down. Yeah, we need change, but let's not quite go so fast. So no one is fulfilling the function. Neither side these days wants to use the scalpel. And so, look, I think there are times in American history when we needed to go faster. In general, I think we should be more cautious. But right now, everyone's using the chainsaw. I don't know if it ever changed. I assume that this is a really bad era that we're going through, and that at some point the pendulum swings back the other direction.
I have discussions with my friend on Substack Live, Michael Cohen, and he has a theory about what the Democrats need to do to win this election. I think upcoming elections, and his answer
Wait,
is nothing.
is this Michael Cohen of Trump fame, or a different Michael
No,
Cohen?
different Michael.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So I have a bunch of these friends who are a different version of the guy you think. Like I grew up with.
There's a lot of Matt Lewis's.
A lot of Matt Lewis's. My paper boy was named Jeffrey Epstein. But anyway, Jeff Ep, we called him. Great guy. No island. Good paper. Good Newsday delivery on the regular. Anyway, Cohen's thesis is Democrats, what do they need to do? Nothing. Trump is so bad and so toxic. He will deliver. And I think Cohen thinks that maybe the Senate, certainly the House. Probably true, but that's short-term thinking. It's a two-part question. Well, the first part is, I mean, if you look at his polls right now, they're very low. But he's okay. Maybe he's losing it, but he has shown the ability to understand where the public is. So do you think there's going to be a bounce back in the next year of Trump popularity based on something Trump does? And do you think that don't do anything, let the other party implode, just in terms of political advice, is good and workable for a couple years out?
So first of all, Trump will have good days and bad days, but the trajectory is decidedly down. He is going down. Now he may he's at 36% according to, I think it was Gallup. That may at some point, I think he can't go any lower, but things are going to get worse. I think the economy is going to get worse. Trump is only going to get older. He did give a speech in Pennsylvania last night at a rally, but generally speaking, he is cloistered. He is out of touch. He is surrounded by billionaires and radical ideologues. And so I think things get worse for Trump, not better. I think in the short term, Democrats can succeed by not being Trump. I think that is good advice in the short term. And actually, in 2028, I don't think the answer is for the party to come together and to come up with some brilliant ideas, right? That's what the Republicans tried to do when they came up with their autopsy. That doesn't really work. What does work is a rock star. Every president in my lifetime You've got Ronald Reagan, was literally a movie star. George H.W. Bush was Reagan's third term, was not charismatic, but was more charismatic than Dukakis. But Bush is the one exception. The first Bush is the one exception. Bill Clinton, rock star. George W. Bush actually had this amazing charisma and swagger. May not have appealed to everyone, but he had that certain something. Obama, the biggest star in the world, and Trump literally was a reality star and is very much larger than life and charismatic and funny, as much as people hate to hear me say it. So I think the real key for Democrats is they need it's like all you need is a rock star to emerge.
Yeah.
But that's really what, in my opinion, what they need. That person decides the vision and becomes the party standard bearer, and the party will then form itself around that person's style and worldview. I'm not saying this is how it ought to be. I didn't write these rules. I just abide by them. But that's really what it is.
Who's it going to be? It's Mamdani, isn't it?
He is not constitutionally eligible to run for president.
Not yet.
It won't be Mamdani. It could be AOC. I think, Gavin Newsom is obviously really did himself a lot of good in the past calendar year. But I really feel like they need a celebrity. Like that, this cuts against me as a conservative person. I don't like the celebritization of politics. But if you think about it, they got a lot of them, and they need one.
I don't know. I think that the thing about Democrats, and this was always brought up, well, Trump's so popular. Who's the celebrity equivalent on the Democratic side? Two names that would get floated are Oprah and Jon Stewart. I think there is something about Democrats that's a lot more allergic to that. Like, they want to believe in the system. They want to, and they do. And they want to have it be an actual politician. A politician for a short time who gains office, just for one. They don't have to be a tenured politician. I guess the rock star names that are floated, some I buy, some I don't, some are pretty deep cuts. I don't think Gretchen Whitmer has it. I've watched her career pretty closely, like when she was
the woman who was hiding behind him.
Exactly, and that's like a silly thing, but in terms of political instincts, and then if you really look into the plot to kidnap Whitmer, the plotters thought that they would do an exchange mid-lake. And they thought they would get her, like do an exchange on a boat in the middle of the lake for some reason. In the lake that they would kidnap her from where her lake house would then connect to a Great Lake, and those lakes do not connect. Anyway, my point is, it wasn't a plot. It was a trick by a couple of embedded FBI informants. And if she runs, there's a lot of the near martyrdom of Gretchen Whitmer.
Wait a second. Let me hold you there. Are you saying that the plot to kidnap Whitmer wasn't legitimate? It wasn't real?
It never
were they entrapped? Were they entrapped by?
Some of them, and there's an excellent podcast on this, and Ken Bessinger, who's with the New York Times, did the podcast. Though with the New York Times, he was not allowed to report on it because they had another assigned reporter, and his much more in-depth reporting, which was also done by a Huffington Post colleague who's, I don't know where she is now, but this is great stuff, and it wasn't allowed in the New York Times, and it totally contradicts the New York Times reporting, which is most reporting, which is that the near martyrdom of Gretchen Whitmer contributes to her political stature. Yeah, it really never would have worked. At one meeting in this plot, something like there were 13 FBI informants or FBI agents within the plotters. Crazy. And I don't know if it's most, but many of the plotters got off. When the federal government brings charges, they almost always get their man, but there were mistrials. There were just flat out not guilty verdicts. Will that mean that she can't go further? I think when a lot of times Democrats think they have a hero, and then conservatives will raise counterpoints, and then Democrats will say this is all the Republican misinformation machine. But it turns out like it's not always misinformation. They're always like, even if it might not be the most important thing, Hunter Biden's laptop really was what they said it was. And I think
Well, do you remember?
anyway,
Do you remember Michael Avenatti, who was
yes,
Stormy
of
Daniels?
course. He was at one point, he was the lawyer, and at one point polls were showing he was like in the top 5 to run for president. I met him at the Texas Tribune Festival, and I don't know if he's in jail now, but he might be. He would do this shakedown technique, like, oh, a lawsuit would sure be bad for you. And when you're Michael Avenatti with his small practice and you do that to an individual, it could work. When you do it to Nike, which is what happens, it's not going to go well. So this is a long way of saying some of the rock stars I don't buy, like Whitmer. I think Josh Shapiro has it. I think that MGP, Maria Gluesenkamp Perez, is interesting. She's either going to really rise far in Democratic politics or become a Republican. I think those are the two possibilities. But yeah, those could be the rock stars. Anyone else? Any other Democrat?
Well, I
AOC
think
is a
those
good
could
one.
be.
I mean,
My concerns are, I think the people you're talking about could be the nominee. I don't think any of them have the rock star capacity. And I really like Shapiro, especially. I wanted him to be the running mate and for Kamala in 2024. But I don't think any of them have that certain je ne sais quoi that Trump, Obama, Bill Clinton, the swagger, the confidence, the magic. I mean, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but supposedly, Andrew Roberts, the writer, historian, who's written about Churchill and Napoleon. I heard him say one time that Napoleon would ask his generals, like, "Yes, but is he lucky?" As if some people,
so
like
good.
Donald Trump is lucky in a weird sort of way. I don't see any Democrats right now who have it. But you know what? The good news is, if you're a Democrat, often these people come out of nowhere. Like people usually aren't. I remember when George Allen, the former Virginia senator, son of the Redskins coach, when all the insiders and the experts in Washington thought George Allen was the next president after George W. Bush. So there could be someone out there that will emerge when the time is right.
Yeah, but let's also say the rock star today, it's clear Obama and Clinton were rock stars. Then, in retrospect, we're like, they always had it. Then there were knocks against them too, right? There were definitely, Obama was a short timer and he had a relationship with Reverend Wright and all this. Yeah, yeah.
But don't you see, I mean, I agree. I agree. And I want to just be careful because it's possible that I'm looking back and like attributing to them. But I think that it's like you can look at I'm not a big NFL aficionado, but I feel like there's certain quarterbacks I look at and I'm like, this guy's got poise.
Yep.
And then I look at another quarter. I remember RG3, the Redskins quarterback. There's a lot of hope in him about a decade ago. But every time the guy had the ball, I was like, I hope he doesn't get killed. You know what I mean? Like, I was never confident. It wasn't like, well, yeah, fair. The Patriots are down by 10 points, but Tom Brady's getting the ball, so we're going to win. I never had that confidence. So I do feel like, and I hope I'm not like kind of misremembering, but I feel like I could look at Bill Clinton, I could look at Obama and know that they had that certain something. And I don't see it in anyone now. But look, I thought Rubio was going to be the guy. So what the hell do I know?
Yeah. I mean, he could they captivated crowds. Wes Moore captivates a crowd. I do think Shapiro's got it. RG3.
When's the last time we elected a president who had glasses?
I guess George Bush, but he didn't wear them in public.
Never mind the fact that he's Jewish, which, by the way, this could be an issue. I mean, I hate to say it. I think it's horrible. But on Republican, both sides of the political aisle right now, this is an issue.
Yeah, it's less, a Jew who is a Zionist, and so that's less.
Yeah.
helpful than it was a few years ago. So you're right. Some quarterbacks don't have it. Then again, remember, Peyton Manning went 3-13 in his first year and 326 touchdowns against 28 interceptions. Now, I don't think people who knew
That's a good
football
poll.
were saying, let's get rid of Peyton Manning. But, sometimes it's
Yeah, I think
the
that's
proving
they develop.
grounds don't always show you everything, right? So
Sometimes,
yeah.
sometimes sometimes you can look at someone and they've got it from day one.
Yes.
And then there are people
this argues for
get
the person
better.
who's off the radar.
Yeah.
This argues for the couple-term New York State assemblyman who is now the hottest booking and possibly the next rock star of the Democratic Party and the most mispronounced name of the year, Zohran Mamdani. So I do, regrettably, we have to end. Some of the commenters wanted you to square your love of the Cal Ripken Jr. Orioles and the Tampa Rays affiliate Durham Bulls. Would just guess you're not a huge Durham Bulls fan as much as a fan of the movie and the hat.
Huge fan of the movie Bull Durham. It is the greatest baseball movie, probably the greatest sports movie. And, at my age, we quit having boyhood role models. But when I think of who are the coolest people that you would want to be like, I mean, everyone's got it's sort of like SNL. You've got your seasons.
Yes.
My generation, it would be I don't know, Clooney's on the list, Costner's on the list, Duchovny's on the list. But yeah, Costner's probably his best performance. Great movie.
Believe Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. I believe there ought to be a constitutional amendment banning artificial turf in the designated hitter. I believe that the novels of Susan Sontag are overrated,
overindulgent. Yeah.
Yes.
I think sometimes originally, I interviewed the guy who wrote the
Ron Shelton.
I interviewed him a couple of years ago, and he had a book out called The Church of Baseball, which is very good. And he didn't note it at the beginning of the movie. The first team you see playing, it's the Hagerstown Suns, but the announcer misidentifies them. And I pointed that out to Ron Shelton. He never knew it. He was not aware of it. But it was just it's such a good movie, and it's so well written. But the Susan Sontag line was not original. It was originally Don DeLillo or someone else. I forget who.
Well, not Don DeLillo. That guy's great.
It wasn't DeLillo, but it was.
Yeah.
It was someone else, and that person found out about it and threatened to sue them before the movie came out. So they changed it to Susan Sontag.
Always thought it was maybe because he's giving the line to Susan Sarandon, and there's something about I even thought maybe he just slipped and said it. I don't know. Yeah, that's a great movie with great lines. Tin Cup, which he also wrote, was a great movie. Yeah.
And Field of Dreams. I mean, Field of Dreams. I cry every time. Yeah. And I watch it with my kids about once a year.
That's another great speech about baseball. Baseball, Ray. Has been built and rebuilt and born again. Like an army of steamrollers comes through, but people will come, Ray. People most.
God, it's so romantic.
People will come, Ray.
You can have your Sleepless in Seattles and all that. You give me Field of Dreams, I'll die on that hill.
Yes. And The Natural was also a great one. The end.
Robert Redford.
That was great. And remember in the beginning where Duvall is calling balls and strikes as he strikes out the whammer, the guy based on Babe Ruth. Oh, I love that scene. And the way they interplay music with the dialogue. Strike three.
It's good. I don't know if boxing or baseball lend them. Probably boxing would lend itself to movies the most. Yes. But baseball's up there.
Well, there is this theory of sports writing. The quality of the writing is inversely proportional to the size of the ball. So golf is the best writing, baseball is the second best. There's never been a good volleyball book, and boxing without any balls at all is the best. Yeah.
I just took a really lame sports line out of my column. You know, I told you I was writing about Crockett in Texas, and I had a line in there that said something about in the movie Friday Night Lights. You know, the Billy Bob Thornton character asks, "Can you be perfect?" And Democrats basically have to be if they're going to win this race. And like, I think that's gotten, you know, that was murder your darlings, right?
Yes,
That
yes,
line is
yes.
that's been expurgated or extirpated or whatever. I pulled it
Yeah.
out.
But now I think of Billy Bob Thornton in the images are him walking alone on a country road trying to get me to buy T-Mobile. So it's not as resonant, is what I'm saying. All right, Matt, we'll end it there. I thank you a lot, and
This was fun.
this one's great. And let's tell the audience, and I will tell you the words of wisdom of the day are: sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes it
Sometimes it
rains.
rains.
Thanks,
Awesome,
sir.
man. Thank you.
All right, talk to you.